The woman walked into a marriage that looked like a funeral. Her new husband wouldn't speak her name, wouldn't meet her eyes, and slept in the barn like an animal exiled from his own life. Clara Whitmore had traveled 800 miles with two frightened boys to marry a stranger, and now she stood in a house emptied of everything but ghosts. The townspeople had warned her. Ethan Hale was a broken man, buried under grief he'd never escape. But Clara didn't come here to be pitied. She came to survive. And if survival meant dragging a dead man back to life, then that's exactly what she'd do. If you're watching from your city tonight, drop a comment below and hit that like button. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this is just the beginning. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Hollow Creek General Store, and Clara Whitmore stepped down into the dust with her two sons clinging to her skirts. The town looked like it was halfway to dying. Boarded up windows, empty hitching posts, a saloon with a faded sign that swung on one hinge. The driver handed down her trunk without a word, took his payment, and left her standing there like cargo nobody had ordered. Her younger boy, Thomas, pressed his face into her side. "Mama, where is he?" Clara scanned the street. A few faces peered out from behind curtains. An old man sat on a porch across the way, watching her with the kind of stare reserved for strangers who wouldn't last the winter. "He'll come," she said, though her voice carried more hope than certainty. Samuel, her older son, crossed his arms. "Maybe he changed his mind. He signed the contract same as I did." Clara smoothed her dress, trying to look like a woman who belonged somewhere. "We'll wait." They waited an hour. The sun climbed higher, turning the dirt road into a skillet. Thomas sat on the trunk, swinging his legs. Samuel kicked at rocks, his jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded Clara too much of his father, the man she'd buried 2 years ago in Illinois, leaving behind nothing but debts and a reputation she couldn't shake. Finally, a wagon appeared at the far end of the street. It came slow, pulled by a pair of horses that looked better fed than most of the people Clara had seen so far. The driver was a broad-shouldered man in a worn coat, hat pulled low. He didn't hurry, didn't wave, just guided the wagon up to where she stood and stopped. He climbed down, still not looking at her. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. His voice was deep, rough-edged, like it didn't get much use. "Mr. Hale?" He nodded once. Then he walked past her, lifted her trunk with no visible effort, and loaded it into the wagon bed. He still hadn't looked her in the face. Samuel stepped forward. "You are new Pa." Ethan Hale paused. His hands rested on the side of the wagon. For a long moment, he didn't answer. "I'm Ethan," he said finally. "That'll do." Thomas tugged on Clara's sleeve. "Mama, I don't like him." "Hush." Ethan gestured toward the wagon. "It's a 2-hour ride. We should go." Clara helped the boys up, then climbed onto the bench beside Ethan. He didn't offer his hand, didn't make room, just took up the reins and started the horses moving without another word. The road out of Hollow Creek was little more than ruts carved through scrubland. The town disappeared behind them quickly, swallowed by the flat, unforgiving landscape. Clara tried to make conversation. "The boys are good workers. Samuel's 10, Thomas is 7. They won't be trouble." Ethan said nothing. "I can cook, sew, keep a house. I'm not afraid of hard work." Still nothing. Samuel leaned forward from the back. "Why don't you talk?" "Samuel," Clara warned. Ethan glanced back, just a flicker of his eyes. "I talk when there's something to say." "That's rude," Samuel muttered. "Samuel, enough." The rest of the ride passed in silence. Clara watched the land change from scrub to rolling hills, then to something darker, pine trees crowding close, shadows pooling beneath them. The air turned cooler. By the time they reached the homestead, the sun was low and Clara's nerves were drawn tight as fence wire. The house was small. Timber and stone tucked into the edge of a clearing with the forest pressing close on 3 sides. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a well. Everything looked functional. Nothing looked welcoming. Ethan stopped the wagon and climbed down. He unloaded the trunk, carried it to the porch, and set it down. "Kitchen's inside, bedroom upstairs. I sleep in the barn." Clara blinked. "The barn?" "You and the boys take the house." "Mr. Hale, it's already decided." He turned toward the barn, then stopped. There's stew on the stove. Help yourself." And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the barn and closing the door behind him. Thomas looked up at Clara, his eyes wide. "Mama, why does he sleep with the animals?" Clara had no answer. She took the boys inside. The house was clean, sparse but clean. A table, 4 chairs, a stone fireplace. Upstairs, a single bedroom with a bed big enough for all 3 of them. The stew on the stove was still warm, venison, potatoes, carrots. It was good, better than Clara had expected. But the silence in the house was louder than any conversation. That night, she lay awake between her sons, staring at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the wind moving through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. And in the barn, a man who wouldn't even sleep under the same roof as his own wife was doing whatever it was broken men did in the dark. Clara had made a lot of bad choices in her life. She was starting to think this might be the worst one. The first week was a study in distance. Ethan rose before dawn. Clara would hear him moving around outside, chopping wood, tending the horses, fixing things that didn't look broken. By the time she got the boys up and made breakfast, he'd already eaten something in the barn and started his work for the day. He came in at noon, ate whatever she'd prepared without comment, and left again. At supper, the same. He sat at the table across from her and the boys and ate in silence. Samuel tried asking him questions at first, about the horses, the woods, whether there were bears, but Ethan's answers were so clipped and joyless that even Samuel gave up. Thomas was afraid of him. Clara was just angry. On the 8th day, she'd had enough. She waited until the boys were asleep, then went out to the barn. The door was heavy, but she shoved it open and stepped inside. Ethan was sitting on a stool near the back, mending a harness by lantern light. He looked up when she entered, but didn't speak. "This isn't going to work," Clara said. He set down the harness. "What isn't?" "This. You hiding in here like some kind of hermit while I raise 2 boys in a house that feels like a tomb. You don't talk. You don't look at us. You barely exist. What exactly did you think you were getting when you signed that marriage contract?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I thought I was getting help. Someone to keep the house, cook the meals. That's what you agreed to." "I agreed to a marriage, not a job." "Same thing." Clara stepped closer, her voice rising. "It's not the same thing and you know it. Those boys need more than a roof and food. They need to feel like they belong somewhere. And She stopped, her hands curling into fists. "I didn't come all this way to be a ghost in your house." Ethan stood, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, something deeper, something like pain. "You don't know what you're asking," he said quietly. "Then tell me." "No." "Why not?" "Because it won't change anything." He picked up the harness again, his hands moving over the leather with practiced precision. "You want to leave? I'll take you back to town. I'll pay for the stage. You can go wherever you want." Clara stared at him. "Is that what you want?" He didn't answer. She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. But she didn't leave. She couldn't afford to. And more than that, she was stubborn. Stubborn enough to outlast a man who thought silence was a solution. So she stayed. And she started to notice things. The way Ethan always made sure the woodpile was stocked before a cold snap. The way he'd replace Samuel's worn-out boots without saying a word, leaving them by the door one morning. The way he watched the tree line at dusk, his hand resting on the rifle he kept by the barn door. He didn't talk, but he was there. One afternoon, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the woods. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. Samuel came crashing out of the trees, his face pale. "Mama! Mama! There's a bear!" Behind him, Thomas stumbled into the clearing, tears streaming down his face. And behind Thomas, Ethan stepped out of the woods, the rifle in his hands, his eyes scanning the shadows. He didn't lower the gun until he was sure nothing was following. "Inside," he said. Clara grabbed the boys and pulled them toward the house. Ethan stayed outside, standing between them and the forest until the sun went down. That night, when Clara brought him supper in the barn, he actually looked at her. "They all right?" he asked. "They're fine. Scared, but fine." He nodded, set down his plate. "They shouldn't go into the woods alone." "I know. I'll tell them." Ethan hesitated. then said, "Bears don't usually come this close. Something's wrong. I'll check the traps tomorrow." Clara sat down on a hay bale, uninvited. "Why do you do this?" "Do what?" "Take care of us. Keep us safe. You won't even talk to us, but you're always there." "Why?" Ethan looked away. "Because it's my job." "It's more than that." "No, it isn't." But the way he said it, quiet, almost desperate, told Clara he was lying. She didn't push. Not yet. Winter came fast. The first snow fell in early November, and by December the world outside was white and silent. The boys adapted faster than Clara expected. Samuel learned to chop kindling. Thomas helped with the chickens. They were still wary of Ethan, but they'd stopped flinching when he walked into a room. Clara, meanwhile, was running out of patience. One night, after the boys were asleep, she found Ethan in the barn again, always the barn, and sat down across from him without asking. "Tell me about your first wife," she said. Ethan went still. "No." "I'm not leaving until you do." He stood up. "Then you'll be here a long time." Clara stood too. "I'm your wife, Ethan, not some stranger you hired. I have a right to know why you can't even look at me." "You're not my wife." His voice was low, rough, almost breaking. "You're a contract, that's all." "Then why do you care if my sons go into the woods? Why do you fix their boots? Why do you stand watch every night like something's going to come for us?" "Because I couldn't save them." The words came out like a shout, raw and jagged. Ethan turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the workbench. "I couldn't save them, and I won't." He stopped, took a breath. "I won't go through that again." Clara's heart twisted. "Who?" Ethan didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Her name was Lily. We had a daughter, Anna. She was 3. He stared at the wall, his knuckles white. "We lived up in the mountains. Higher than this. I thought we'd be safe there. Away from people. Away from everything." "What happened?" "Winter storm. I was out checking the traps. By the time I got back," his voice cracked. "The cabin was buried. I dug for 2 days. Found them together. Lily was holding her." Clara closed her eyes. "I buried them up there," Ethan continued, "under the pines. And I swore I'd never—" He shook his head. "I can't do it again, Clara. I can't care about people and lose them. I can't." Clara stepped forward slowly and placed her hand on his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You're not losing us," she said softly. "We're right here. For now. For as long as you'll have us." Ethan finally looked at her. His eyes were dark, haunted, full of a grief that hadn't faded in years. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Neither do I," Clara admitted. "But we're doing it anyway." Something shifted after that night. Ethan didn't move into the house, but he started eating breakfast with them. Started answering Samuel's questions, really answering, not just grunting. He taught Thomas how to whistle. He even smiled once when Samuel tried to milk the cow and got kicked in the shin. Clara caught herself watching him, the way he moved, the way he listened, the quiet strength in him that had nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with endurance. She'd married him out of desperation, but somewhere along the way she'd started to see him as more than a contract. One evening in late December, Clara was washing dishes when Ethan came inside, shaking snow from his coat. "Storm's coming," he said. "Big one. We'll need to bring the animals in close." "I'll help." They worked together in the barn, moving hay, checking the horses. The wind picked up, howling through the gaps in the walls. Clara's fingers were numb by the time they finished. Ethan lit a lantern and hung it from a hook. Then he did something he'd never done before. He looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "Thank you." Claire blinked. "For what?" "For staying, for not giving up on this. On me." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Ethan reached out, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hand lingered for just a moment before he pulled back. "You should get inside," he said quietly. "Before the storm hits." Clara didn't move. "You should come with me." "Clara, I mean it. Come inside. Sleep in the house. You don't have to be alone out here anymore." Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. That night, he slept on the floor by the fire. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time since Clara had arrived, the house didn't feel quite so empty. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like the land itself wasn't sure it wanted to thaw. Ethan still had nightmares. Clara would hear him sometimes, in the dark, breathing hard, muttering names she couldn't make out. She didn't press him about it, just let him know, in small ways, that she was there. Samuel started calling him Ethan instead of Mr. Hale. Thomas began sitting next to him at supper. And Clara found herself falling for a man she'd married out of necessity. Not because he was easy or charming or whole, but because he was trying. Because beneath all that silence and grief, there was something worth reaching for. One morning in April, Ethan came into the kitchen and set a letter on the table. "What's this?" Clara asked. "Railroad company. They want to buy my old land, the place where—" He stopped. "Where Lily and Anna are buried." Clara picked up the letter. The offer was generous, too generous. "You're not selling," she said. "I don't know." "Yes, you do. That land means something to you. They can't have it." Ethan sank into a chair. "If I don't sell, they'll take it anyway. They've got lawyers, money. I can't fight them." Clara set the letter down, her mind already turning. "Then we'll find another way." Ethan looked at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "We?" he said. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. "We?" she said firmly. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hale smiled. The railroad company didn't wait long to make their next move. 3 days after the letter arrived, a man in a pressed suit showed up at the homestead in a polished buggy that looked obscene against the rough landscape. He introduced himself as Mr. Vernon Garrett, land acquisitions manager for the Continental Western Railroad. He had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Clara answered the door. Ethan was out fixing fence posts, and she'd sent the boys to gather eggs. "Mrs. Hale," Garrett said, tipping his hat. "Is your husband available?" "He's working. I'll wait." Clara didn't invite him in. "You can state your business to me." Garrett's smile thinned. "This is a matter between men, ma'am. I'm his wife. That makes it my matter, too." The smile disappeared entirely. Garrett pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "We've made a very generous offer for the mountain property. If Mr. Hale refuses to sell, we'll be forced to pursue other avenues. Eminent domain, for one. The railroad serves the public good, and the courts tend to agree." Clara took the document but didn't open it. "The answer is no. You haven't even looked at the terms. Don't need to. That land isn't for sale." Garrett's expression hardened. "Mrs. Hale, I don't think you understand the position you're in. Your husband owns 40 acres of prime mountain passage. We need that corridor. We will get that corridor. The only question is whether you walk away with money in your pocket or nothing at all." "Sounds like a threat." "It's a fact." Clara stepped forward, holding the document out. "Take this back to whoever sent you and tell them the Hales aren't interested." Garrett didn't take the paper. "You're making a mistake." "Then it's ours to make." She closed the door in his face. Through the window, she watched him climb back into his buggy, his movements sharp with irritation. He didn't leave right away. Just sat there, staring at the house like he was memorizing it. When Ethan came in an hour later, Clara told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, he sat down heavily at the table. "They'll take it," he said, "one way or another. Not if we fight back." "With what? I don't have money for lawyers, don't have friends in high places. They'll go to court, and a judge will sign whatever paper they put in front of him." Clara paced the kitchen, her mind working. "There has to be something, some way to make this harder for them." "There isn't." "You're giving up already?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm being realistic." "No, you're being afraid." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You think I'm afraid?" "I think you've spent so long running from pain that you don't know how to stand your ground anymore." His eyes flashed. "That's not fair." "Maybe not, but it's true." Ethan stared at her, his hands clenched at his sides. Then he grabbed his coat and walked out. Clara watched him go, her heart pounding. She'd pushed too hard, she knew it, but someone had to. Samuel came in from the porch, his face uncertain. Is Ethan mad? A little. At you? At everything. Clara forced a smile. Don't worry, he'll cool off. But when night fell and Ethan still hadn't come back, Clara started to wonder if she'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. She found him just after midnight, sitting on the ridge above the house, staring out at the dark line of mountains in the distance. Clara sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. I went back once, Ethan said finally, after I buried them. Stood there looking at those graves, and I thought, what's the point? Why keep going? Clara said nothing, just listened. I walked away because I couldn't stand being there, couldn't stand seeing the place where I failed. He picked up a stone and turned it over in his hands. And now someone wants to plow through it like it never mattered, like they never mattered. Then we don't let them. How? Clara thought about it. The land belonged to your first wife too, didn't it, Lily? Ethan nodded. It was her family's territory. She was Shoshone. Her people used that land for generations before settlers came through. Her father gave us permission to build there. Does her family still live nearby? Some of them up near the Wind River Range. Why? Clara's mind was racing now. If the land has tribal significance, that changes things. The railroad can't just steamroll through sacred ground without consequences. There'd be questions. Public backlash. Ethan looked at her. You want to go to her family? Ask them to help fight this? Do you have a better idea? He was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. I haven't seen them since the funeral. They probably think I abandoned Lily, abandoned her memory. Did you? Yes. The honesty of it cut through the darkness. Then this is your chance to make it right, Clara said gently. Ethan exhaled slowly. It's a long ride, dangerous this time of year. We've handled worse. He turned to look at her, really look at her, and something in his expression softened. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. You're my husband. That land holds part of your past, which makes it part of our future. Ethan reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Clara said with a faint smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. They sat there together on the ridge, watching the stars wheel overhead. And for the first time since the letter had arrived, Clara felt like they had a chance. The next morning, Ethan told the boys they'd be taking a trip. Where? Samuel asked, instantly suspicious. To the mountains, to visit some people. Thomas looked worried. Are there bears? Probably, but we'll be careful. They packed light, bedrolls, supplies for a week, rifles. Clara left instructions with their nearest neighbor, a gruff old trapper named Dutch, who owed Ethan a favor. He agreed to check on the homestead while they were gone. The ride took 3 days. They followed old trails through pine forests and across high meadows still patched with snow. The boys rode in the wagon bed, bundled in blankets, while Clara sat up front beside Ethan. Tell me about Lily, Clara said on the second day. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the trail. Why? Because if I'm going to ask her family for help, I should know who she was. He was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking. She was strong, stronger than me in a lot of ways. Grew up in the mountains, knew how to survive out here better than any white man I ever met. She taught me to track, to read weather, to move through the woods without leaving a trace. His voice softened. She laughed a lot, even when things were hard, especially when things were hard. How did you meet? I was trapping beaver up near the Sweetwater, got caught in a storm, lost my horse, nearly froze to death. Her father found me half dead in a snowbank and brought me back to their camp. Lily was the one who nursed me back. Took weeks before I could walk again. Clara smiled. And you fell in love? Not right away. I was stubborn, thought I didn't need anyone. But she wore me down, said I was too stupid to survive on my own. He paused. She was right. She sounds remarkable. She was. Clara heard the grief in his voice, but also something else. Something lighter. Like talking about Lily didn't hurt quite as much as it used to. Anna looked just like her, Ethan added quietly. Same dark eyes, same laugh. Clara reached over and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. They reached the Shoshone camp late on the third day. It was smaller than Clara had imagined. A cluster of lodges tucked into a valley with a stream running through it. Smoke rose from cook fires. Children played near the water. A few men stood at the edge of the camp watching their approach with wary eyes. Ethan brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down slowly. One of the men stepped forward. He was older, maybe 60, with gray streaking through his long hair and a face carved by wind and time. "Ethan Hale," the man said. His voice was flat. "Didn't think we'd see you again." "Hello, Joseph." Joseph looked past Ethan to Clara and the boys. "You bring a new family to show us?" "This is my wife, Clara, her sons, Samuel and Thomas." Joseph's gaze lingered on Clara. "You replace Lily fast." Clara felt the sting of the words but kept her face neutral. Ethan's jaw tightened. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" "It's complicated." Joseph crossed his arms. "Why are you here, Ethan? I need your help." "Help?" Joseph laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You left my daughter in the ground and disappeared for 5 years. Didn't come back. Didn't send word. And now you need help? I know I don't have the right to ask." "You're damn right you don't." An older woman emerged from one of the lodges. She was small, her hair white, her movements deliberate. She walked up to Ethan and studied his face for a long moment. Then she slapped him. The sound cracked through the camp. Ethan didn't flinch, just stood there and took it. "You dishonor her memory," the woman said in accented English. "You run like a coward." "I know." "You leave her alone in the earth." "I know." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "She loved you. She died loving you, and you leave her." Ethan's voice broke. "I couldn't stay, Dancing Bird. I couldn't." "You could. You didn't." Clara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "He's here now." Dancing Bird turned to her. "Who are you?" "His wife. And I'm not here to replace anyone, but I am here to help him do what he should have done years ago." Dancing Bird studied her. "Which is? Protect the land where Lily and Anna rest. Keep it from being destroyed." Joseph frowned. "Destroyed? By who?" Ethan explained. The railroad, the buyout offer, the threat of eminent domain. As he talked, more people gathered. By the time he finished, there were at least 20 listening. An older man with a scarred face spoke up. "The railroad comes through, they'll tear up the whole valley. Not just your land, ours too eventually." "That's what I'm afraid of," Ethan said. Joseph looked at Dancing Bird. Some unspoken conversation passed between them. Then Joseph sighed. "Come," he said. "We'll talk by the fire." They spent the evening around the central fire pit, passing a pipe and talking strategy. Clara listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, people listened. She had a way of framing things that made sense, not just emotionally, but practically. "If the railroad thinks this land is empty, they'll take it without a second thought," she said. "But if it's a burial site, if it has cultural significance, if there are people willing to stand up and say this place matters, that changes the equation. It becomes a public fight, and public fights are harder to win quietly." A younger man named Two Horses leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" "Witnesses," Clara said. "People who can testify that this land has been used by your people for generations, that it's sacred ground, that tearing through it would be a desecration." "White courts don't care about our land," someone muttered. "Maybe not," Clara admitted, "but they care about looking bad in the newspapers. And if we can get a reporter to cover this, if we can make enough noise, they'll still find a way," Joseph interrupted. "They always do." "Maybe," Clara said, "but at least we'll have tried. And maybe, just maybe, we'll win." Dancing Bird stood. She walked over to Ethan and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You come back to my daughter," she said quietly. "You face what you ran from. That takes strength." She paused. "I will help you. We will help you." Ethan's eyes glistened. "Thank you." "But when this is done," Dancing Bird continued, "you take me to her grave. You show me you remember." "I will. I promise." That night, they stayed in the camp. Clara and the boys slept in a lodge that smelled of smoke and sage. Ethan sat outside by the fire with Joseph, the two of them talking in low voices until dawn. The next morning, they began the journey back. But this time, they weren't alone. Joseph, 2 horses, and 3 others rode with them, bringing documents, maps, and testimonies written in careful English. On the ride home, Samuel asked Ethan, "Are we going to win?" Ethan looked at the boy, then at Clara. "I don't know, Sam, but we're going to try." "That's all we can do," Clara added. When they reached the homestead, there was another letter waiting. This one wasn't from the railroad. It was from a lawyer in Hollow Creek, a man named Augustus Finch. The letter was brief. "Mr. Hale, I've been retained by the Continental Western Railroad to initiate condemnation proceedings on your mountain property. You have 30 days to vacate and accept payment. Failure to comply will result in legal action." Clara read it aloud, then set it down. 30 days. Ethan's face was grim. "We need to move fast." "Agreed. First thing tomorrow, we ride into Hollow Creek. Find a lawyer of our own. File a counterclaim." "With what money?" Clara thought about it. "We sell something. The horses, maybe. Or—" "No." Ethan shook his head. "We need the horses. We need everything we have to work this place." Joseph, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "There's another way." They looked at him. "Make them think you'll be more trouble than you're worth," he said. "They're used to people rolling over. Show them you won't. Drag this out. Make it expensive. Make it public." Clara's eyes lit up. "The newspaper." Ethan frowned. "What newspaper?" "There's a paper in Cheyenne, the Tribune. I read it once when I was passing through. They love stories about the railroad bullying settlers." 2 horses grinned. "You think they'd cover this?" "If we give them something worth covering." Clara grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil and started writing. She drafted a letter to the editor, outlining the case: land grab, sacred burial ground, a widow and her children being forced off their home. She made it emotional, made it righteous, made it impossible to ignore. Ethan read it over her shoulder. "You really think this will work?" "I think it's our best shot." He nodded slowly. "All right, let's do it." The next week was a blur. Clara sent the letter to Cheyenne. Ethan and Joseph met with a lawyer in Hollow Creek, a young man fresh out of law school named Benjamin Cotter, who agreed to take the case for a fraction of his usual fee, mostly because he hated the railroad. "They've been pushing people around for years," Cotter said, shuffling through papers in his cramped office. "Nobody's ever pushed back. I'd like to be the one who helps change that." "Can we win?" Clara asked. Cotter hesitated. "Honestly, probably not. But we can make them work for it. And if the Tribune picks up the story, public pressure might force them to back off." "Might? It's better than nothing." They filed a counterclaim, arguing that the land had cultural and historical significance, that it was a burial site, and that condemnation proceedings violated both territorial law and basic human decency. The railroad's response was swift and brutal. They filed motions to dismiss, brought in affidavits from engineers claiming the route was the only viable option, and hinted in legal filings that the Hales were simply looking for a bigger payout. The Tribune, however, ran the story. The article appeared 2 weeks after Clara sent the letter. It was front page, above the fold, with a headline that read, "Railroad Threatens Sacred Ground in Land Grab." The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Howe, had done her homework. She interviewed Ethan, Clara, Joseph, and even traveled to the mountain site to photograph the graves. The article was scathing. The Continental Western Railroad, in its relentless push for expansion, now seeks to desecrate a burial site where a young mother and child rest. Ethan Hale, a widower and father, stands in their path, not for profit, but for principle. The question before us is simple. Do we value progress over people? Profit over the past? The response was immediate. Letters poured into the Tribune's offices. Editorials appeared in other papers. A church group in Cheyenne organized a petition. The railroad found itself on the defensive. Vernon Garrett showed up at the homestead again, this time without the smile. "You're making a mistake," he told Ethan. "All this noise won't change the outcome. You're just delaying the inevitable." Ethan stood on the porch, arms crossed. Then I guess we'll delay it as long as we can. We'll destroy you in court. Maybe. But everyone will know what kind of people you are. Garrett's face darkened. You think you're a hero? You're just a stubborn fool. Clara stepped out onto the porch beside Ethan. And you're a man who tears up graves for a paycheck. I know which one I'd rather be. Garrett pointed at her. You're going to regret this. Probably, Clara said calmly. But at least I'll be able to sleep at night. Garrett left in a cloud of dust, and Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Ethan looked at her. You're not afraid of him. I'm terrified of him, but I'm not letting him see it. Ethan smiled, really smiled, for the first time in days. You're something else, Clara Hale. So are you. The court date was set for late June, and in the weeks leading up to it, Claire and Ethan prepared. They gathered affidavits from Joseph and the others. They rehearsed their testimony with Benjamin Cotter. They even convinced Dancing Bird to come down from the mountains to speak. The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning through everything that could go wrong. Ethan rolled over beside her. You awake? Yeah. Nervous? Terrified. He reached out and took her hand in the darkness. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know. I'm glad you're here. Glad you didn't give up on me. Clara squeezed his hand. I'm glad I didn't either. I mean it, Clara. I was dead before you came, just going through motions. You brought me back. She turned to face him, their faces inches apart in the dim light. You brought yourself back. I just gave you a reason. Ethan leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, like he was afraid she might disappear. Clara kissed him back, and for a moment, the fear and uncertainty faded. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. We're going to fight like hell tomorrow. Damn right we are. And they did. The hearing was held in a stuffy courtroom in Cheyenne, packed with reporters, railroad lawyers, and curious onlookers. Judge Harold Pemberton presided, a gray-haired man with a reputation for fairness, though everyone knew he had ties to the railroad industry. Benjamin Cotter presented their case first. He called Ethan to the stand and walked him through the history of the land, the loss of his family, the significance of the burial site. Ethan's voice was steady, but Clara could see his hands trembling. The railroad's lawyer, a slick man named Harrison Voss, tried to rattle him on cross-examination. Mr. Hale, isn't it true that you abandoned this land for 5 years? Yes. And during that time you made no effort to maintain it, pay taxes on it, or otherwise demonstrate ownership? I paid the taxes every year. Voss paused. Through a proxy, correct? Through a bank. But I paid them. And yet you never visited, never returned to the graves you now claim are so important. Ethan's jaw tightened. I was grieving. I handled it badly. But that doesn't mean the land doesn't matter. Or perhaps it means the land matters less than the money you think you can extract from my clients. Cotter shot to his feet. Objection. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Pemberton said. Move on, Mr. Voss. Next, Joseph took the stand. He spoke with quiet dignity about the land's history, the generations of his people who had used it, the significance of the burial site. Voss tried to discredit him too. Mr. Two Bears, can you produce any legal documentation proving your people's claim to this land? We didn't need documents. We lived there. But you have no treaties, no deeds, nothing recognized by the territorial government? No. Then by what legal standard should this court honor your claim? Joseph looked Voss in the eye. By the standard of decency. The courtroom murmured. Pemberton banged his gavel. Order. Finally, Dancing Bird testified. She spoke in halting English, describing Lily, the cabin, the day Ethan had come to tell them his wife and daughter were gone. He was broken, she said. Like a tree struck by lightning, I was angry at him, still angry. But he loved my daughter, and she is in that ground. If you let them tear through it, you tear through her. Voss didn't cross-examine her. Even he had limits. When all the testimony was done, Pemberton called a recess. Clara sat beside Ethan in the hallway, waiting. The minutes dragged like hours. Finally, they were called back in. Pemberton looked out over the courtroom. This is a difficult case. The law is clear. Eminent domain exists for the public good, but the application of that law requires judgment, discernment. Clara's heart pounded. I find, Pemberton continued, that the railroad has made a compelling case for the necessity of this route. However, I also find that the defendants have raised significant questions about the cultural and moral implications of this action. He paused. Therefore, I am ordering a 60-day continuance to allow both parties to explore alternative routes. If no viable alternative can be found, I will rule in favor of the railroad. But I will not do so lightly, and I will not do so without every effort being made to honor the concerns raised here today. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Voss looked furious. Cotter grinned. Clara grabbed Ethan's hand. We didn't lose. We didn't win either. No, but we bought time. And time is something. Outside the courthouse, Margaret Howe cornered them for a quote. Clara gave her one. This isn't about stopping progress. It's about making sure progress doesn't crush the people who built this country in the first place. The quote ran in the next day's paper. And for the first time since the fight began, Clara allowed herself to hope. Hope, Clara learned, was a dangerous thing to carry. It made you careless, made you think the worst was behind you when it was really just gathering strength. The 60-day continuance felt like a reprieve, but the railroad didn't treat it that way. Within a week, surveyors appeared in the mountains, mapping alternate routes with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd already known this was coming. Harrison Voss filed motion after motion, bearing Benjamin Cotter in paperwork that cost time and money they didn't have. And then Vernon Garrett started playing dirty. It began with whispers in Hollow Creek. Clara heard them when she went to buy flour at the general store. The shopkeeper, a thin man named Horace, wouldn't meet her eyes as he measured out the grain. Heard your husband's causing trouble, Horace said carefully. Heard wrong, Clara replied. We're protecting what's ours. That's one way to see it. Horace tied off the sack. Other ways you're holding up progress, jobs, money coming into the territory. Clara set her coins on the counter. Since when did you care about the railroad's money? Since they started talking about running a supply depot through here. Would bring work, bring people. He slid the sack across to her. Folks are saying the Hales are being selfish. Folks can say whatever they want. Maybe, but words have a way of turning into action. Clara carried the flour out to the wagon, her jaw tight. Samuel was waiting in the driver's seat, his legs dangling. What's wrong? He asked. Nothing, just people talking. About us? Clara climbed up beside him. Don't worry about it. But she was worried, and she had reason to be. 2 nights later, someone set fire to their hay barn. Ethan woke to the smell of smoke. He was out of bed and running before Clara had even opened her eyes. By the time she got outside with the boys, the barn was fully engulfed, flames licking 30 feet into the night sky. Stay back, Ethan shouted. He was hauling buckets from the well, throwing water on the fire, but it was useless. The structure was old, dry timber. It burned like kindling. Joseph and 2 horses appeared out of the darkness, having seen the glow from their camp a mile away. They helped Ethan save the main house by soaking the roof and walls, but the barn was gone. By dawn, all that remained was a skeleton of blackened beams and ash. Clara stood in the ruins, her face smudged with soot. This wasn't an accident. Ethan didn't argue. He was staring at something in the ash, a kerosene can, half melted but still recognizable. They're sending a message, he said quietly. Then we send one back. How? Clara's eyes were hard. We don't back down. We rebuild. And we make sure everyone knows exactly who did this. By noon, half of Hollow Creek knew about the fire. Margaret Howe arrived by late afternoon, her notebook already out. She interviewed Clara and Ethan, photographed the wreckage, and wrote an article that ran the next day with the headline, Arson at Hale Homestead, Railroad Intimidation Suspected. Vernon Garrett issued a statement denying any involvement. The Continental Western Railroad condemns this criminal act and calls for a full investigation. We do not condone violence or intimidation of any kind. But the damage was done. Public opinion, which had been shifting against the Hales, swung back in their favor. Donations started arriving, small amounts from people who'd read the stories, who believed in what the Hales were fighting for. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rebuilding the barn took 3 weeks. Neighbors who'd been standoffish before showed up with lumber and nails. Even Horace from the general store brought supplies, looking sheepish. "Heard about what happened," he muttered. "Didn't sit right." Clara accepted his help without comment. Ethan worked himself to exhaustion, driving posts and framing walls from dawn until dark. Samuel and Thomas helped where they could, hauling boards and fetching tools. The barn that rose from the ashes wasn't as big as the old one, but it was solid. On the day they finished, Ethan stood back and looked at it, sweat dripping down his face. "It'll do," he said. Clara handed him a dipper of water. "It's more than that. It's proof we're still here." He drank, then looked at her. "You ever regret coming here?" "Every other day." He laughed, a short, rough sound. "Honest, at least." "I didn't come here expecting easy, Ethan. I came expecting to survive. And we are. Barely. Barely's enough." He handed the dipper back, his fingers brushing hers. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Good thing you don't have to find out." The 60-day deadline was approaching fast. Benjamin Cotter sent word that the railroad's engineers had filed reports claiming no viable alternate route existed. The land Ethan owned was the only passage that didn't require tunneling through solid granite or bridging an impassable gorge. "They're lying," Joseph said when he read the report. "There's a pass 6 miles north, longer route sure, but it's there." Cotter shook his head. "Proving that requires our own survey, which costs money we don't have." "How much costs us?" Clara asked. $500, maybe more." The number hung in the air like a sentence. Ethan looked at Clara. "We don't have it." "Then we find it." "How?" Clara thought hard. They'd already sold what they could spare. The donations had helped with the barn, but there wasn't enough left for this. Then she remembered something. "Your trapping gear, the pelts you've been stockpiling." Ethan frowned. "That's for winter supplies." "Winter doesn't matter if we lose the land." "Clara, I'm not saying it's a good option. I'm saying it's the only option." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll take them to Cheyenne, see what I can get." "We'll all go, Clara said. "This is a family fight. We face it together." The trip to Cheyenne took 2 days. Ethan sold the pelts to a fur trader who drove a hard bargain but paid in cash. They walked away with $380. Not quite enough, but close. Clara stood in the street thinking. Then she did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She went to a pawnbroker and sold her wedding ring from her first marriage. The ring had been worthless sentimentally. Her first husband had been a drunk and a liar, but it was real gold. The broker gave her $75. When she came out, Ethan was waiting. "What did you do?" he asked. Clara held up the money. "What needed doing?" "That was your ring." "It was a piece of metal from a life I'm done with." She pressed the bills into his hand. "This is the life I'm choosing. Now let's go hire a surveyor." They found a man named Caleb Ross, a grizzled engineer with 40 years of experience mapping rail routes. He listened to their story, looked at the railroad's report, and snorted. "This is garbage," he said, tapping the papers. "They're claiming the only route is straight through your land. I could find 3 alternatives before breakfast." "Will you testify to that?" Clara asked. "For $450, I'll testify to whatever's true." They paid him on the spot. Ross spent a week in the mountains with Joseph as his guide. When he came back, he had maps, photographs, and a detailed report outlining 2 viable alternate routes. One 6 miles north, another 8 miles south. Both added distance and cost, but neither required tunneling or impossible bridges. "The railroad doesn't want to use these routes because they're more expensive," Ross explained, "but they're absolutely feasible. Anyone saying otherwise is lying or incompetent." Benjamin Cotter grinned when he saw the report. "This changes everything." The second hearing was scheduled for mid-August. This time, the courtroom was even more packed. Word had spread. People came from all over the territory: settlers, traders, tribal representatives, even a few railroad workers who were quietly rooting for the Hales. Judge Pemberton looked older than he had 2 months ago, the weight of the case clearly pressing on him. Cotter presented Caleb Ross's findings first. Ross took the stand and methodically dismantled the railroad's engineering report, pointing out errors, omissions, and outright fabrications. Harrison Voss tried to discredit him. "Mr. Ross, isn't it true you've been hired by anti-railroad groups in the past?" "I've been hired by people who wanted honest assessments. Sometimes that meant supporting rail expansion. Sometimes it meant opposing it. But you have a bias against the railroad industry. I have a bias against bad engineering and dishonest reporting. If that makes me anti-railroad, so be it." The courtroom murmured approvingly. Next, Joseph testified again, this time bringing tribal elders who spoke about the historical significance of the valley. They brought artifacts, arrowheads, pottery, tools, proving their people had used the land for generations. Voss tried a different tactic. "Mr. Two Bears, if this land is so sacred, why did you allow Mr. Hale to build a cabin there?" "Because Lily was one of us. She chose to live there with her husband. We honored her choice. And now you're dishonoring it by fighting to keep it undeveloped." Joseph's eyes flashed. "We're honoring it by keeping it from being torn apart for profit." Then it was Clara's turn. Cotter had prepped her carefully, but nothing could prepare her for the feeling of sitting in that chair with hundreds of eyes on her. Voss approached like a predator circling prey. "Mrs. Hale, you married Mr. Hale under what circumstances?" "Proxy marriage. I was widowed, needed a fresh start. He needed help on his homestead." "A business arrangement?" "At first, yes." "And now?" Clara looked at Ethan, sitting in the gallery. "Now it's more than that." "How convenient." A marriage of convenience becomes a love story just when there's money and attention at stake. Cotter stood. "Objection! Counsel is editorializing." "Sustained." Voss changed direction. "Mrs. Hale, you've been very vocal in the press, very strategic in garnering public sympathy. Isn't this whole fight really about extracting a larger settlement from the railroad?" "No." "Then what is it about?" Clara leaned forward. "It's about a man who lost everything and finally found the courage to protect what's left. It's about honoring the people buried in that ground. And it's about not letting powerful men steamroll over anyone who gets in their way." Very poetic, but the reality is, the railroad serves the public good. It brings commerce, jobs, connection. Your husband's attachment to 40 acres of wilderness doesn't outweigh that. Maybe not in your eyes, but in ours, it does, and we have a right to fight for it. Voss smiled thinly. "Even if you lose?" "Especially then." The courtroom erupted in applause. Pemberton banged his gavel, but he didn't look displeased. When Clara stepped down, her hands were shaking. Ethan met her at the railing. "You were perfect," he whispered. "I was terrified." Didn't show. The final witness was Ethan himself. Cotter walked him through the history one more time, meeting Lily, building the cabin, the storm, the loss, the years of grief and running. "Why come back now?" Cotter asked. "Because I was tired of running, tired of being afraid. And because Clara showed me that the past doesn't have to own you. You can honor it without being buried by it." Voss's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered on Ethan's absence, his failure to maintain the land, his sudden interest in protecting it only when money was involved. "Mr. Hale, you claim this is about honoring your late wife, but you abandoned her grave for 5 years. You didn't visit, didn't maintain it, didn't even tell her family where you were. How is that honor?" Ethan's voice was quiet but steady. "It's not. I failed her, I know that, but I'm trying to make it right now." "A little late, don't you think?" "Yes, but better late than never." Voss pressed harder. "Isn't the truth that you're using your dead wife as leverage, that you're exploiting her memory for financial gain?" Ethan's hands clenched on the arms of the chair. "If you think that, you don't understand anything about this." "Then help me understand. Why should this court side with you, a man who walked away from his responsibilities, over a railroad that will bring progress and prosperity to thousands?" Ethan looked out at the courtroom, at Clara, at Joseph and Dancing Bird, at the reporters and strangers who'd come to see how this would end. "Because some things matter more than progress," he said. Some things are worth protecting even if it costs you everything. And if we lose that, if we decide that nothing is sacred, that everything can be bought or bulldozed, then what's the point of any of it? The room was silent. Voss had no response. Pemberton called a recess. This time the wait was longer. Hours stretched into evening. Clara and Ethan sat on a bench outside the courthouse, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "Whatever happens," Ethan said, "I want you to know this was worth it. Fighting for this, having you beside me, all of it." Clara took his hand. "We're not done yet." Finally, they were called back in. Pemberton looked exhausted. He shuffled papers, cleared his throat, and began. "This court has reviewed all testimony, exhibits, and legal arguments. The question before us is not simple. The law grants the railroad significant authority under eminent domain. But the law also requires that such authority be exercised with care, with consideration for those affected, and with genuine necessity." Clara held her breath. "The railroad has argued that the route through Mr. Hale's property is the only viable option. However, the evidence presented by Mr. Ross conclusively demonstrates that alternative routes exist. They are more expensive, yes. More difficult, yes. But they are viable." Voss shifted in his seat. "Furthermore," Pemberton continued, "this court finds that the cultural and historical significance of the land in question cannot be dismissed. The graves of Mrs. Lily Hale and her daughter Anna represent not just personal loss, but a connection to the indigenous people of this territory whose presence predates all of us." He paused, and Clara felt her heart hammering. "Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendants. The railroad's petition for condemnation is denied. The Continental Western Railroad is ordered to pursue one of the alternate routes identified in Mr. Ross's survey." "There are some misasamang." The courtroom exploded. Reporters bolted for the doors. People cheered. Dancing Bird wept openly. Joseph clapped Ethan on the shoulder so hard he nearly knocked him over. Claire just sat there, stunned. They'd won. Against all odds, against all money and power and pressure, they'd won. Voss was on his feet shouting objections, but Pemberton shut him down. "This court has ruled, Mr. Voss. If you wish to appeal, that is your right, but for now, the decision stands." Outside the courthouse, Margaret Howe cornered them for one last interview. "How do you feel?" she asked, pencil poised. Clara looked at Ethan, then back at Howe. "Grateful, exhausted, and ready to go home." "What's next for you?" Ethan answered. "We're going to the mountains, to honor the people buried there, and then we're going to live." The article ran the next day. The headline read, "David defeats Goliath. Hales win fight against railroad." But for Clara and Ethan, the victory felt fragile. Voss had promised an appeal. The railroad had deep pockets and long reach. This might not be over. Still, they'd bought time. And more than that, they'd proven something. They'd proven they could stand. The journey to the mountain cabin took 4 days. This time, the whole family went. Clara, Ethan, Samuel, Thomas, Joseph, Dancing Bird, 2 horses, and several others from the tribe. When they reached the valley where the old cabin had stood, Clara's breath caught. The place was overgrown, reclaimed by forest. The cabin itself was a ruin. Roof collapsed, walls crumbling. But the graves were still there, marked by simple wooden crosses weathered gray by time. Dancing Bird walked to the graves and knelt. She placed her hands on the earth and spoke in her native tongue, words Clara couldn't understand but felt in her bones. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the crosses. Clara touched his arm gently. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded, though his face was pale. Together, they walked to the graves. Ethan knelt, his hands trembling as they touched the markers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I left you here alone." Clara knelt beside him, her hand on his back. "I brought someone," Ethan continued, his voice breaking. "Her name is Clara. She's strong, stronger than me. And she brought 2 boys, Samuel and Thomas. They're good kids. You'd like them." Tears streamed down his face. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I failed you. But I'm trying, Lily. I'm trying to be the man you believed I could be." Dancing Bird rose and placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder. She hears you. She knows. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. For the next 2 days, they worked. They cleared the graves, repaired the crosses, planted wildflowers. Ethan and Joseph rebuilt a small stone cairn to mark the site more permanently. On the final evening, they gathered around a fire. Joseph told stories about Lily, her stubbornness, her laughter, her fierce loyalty. Dancing Bird sang a song in Shoshone, her voice rising into the darkness. Clara watched Ethan across the fire. He looked different, lighter somehow, like a weight he'd carried for years had finally been lifted. Later, when everyone else had gone to sleep, Clara and Ethan sat together under the stars. "Thank you," Ethan said. "For what?" "For making me come back here, for not letting me run anymore." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "You would have come back eventually." "Maybe, but I wouldn't have survived it without you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind in the pines. "What do we do now?" Clara asked. Ethan thought about it. "We live here, rebuild the cabin, make this place a home again. Not just for ghosts, but for us, for the boys." "You want to leave the other homestead?" "We'll keep it, use it in the winter maybe, but this," he gestured at the valley, "this is where I need to be, where we need to be." Clara considered it. The valley was remote, harsh, difficult, but it was also beautiful, and it was theirs. "All right," she said, "let's build something here." They started the next morning. With help from Joseph and the others, they began clearing the ruins of the old cabin. Ethan salvaged what he could. Timbers that were still solid, the old stone fireplace. The rest they hauled away. Samuel and Thomas threw themselves into the work with surprising enthusiasm. Thomas found Lily's old garden plot and insisted on replanting it. Samuel helped Ethan mark out the foundation for the new cabin. Clara watched her boys and felt something shift inside her. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building. They were becoming a family. The new cabin took shape over weeks. It was larger than the old one, big enough for all of them, with a loft for the boys and a real bedroom for Clara and Ethan. They used local timber, riverstone, and sweat. Dancing Bird visited often, bringing food and supplies, teaching Clara about the plants that grew in the mountains, the rhythms of the seasons. Slowly, tentatively, a bond formed between them, not mother and daughter, but something close. One afternoon, Dancing Bird took Clara aside. "You're good for him," she said. Clara smiled. "I hope so." "You are. Lily would approve." The word struck Clara harder than she expected. She'd been so focused on not replacing Lily that she hadn't considered whether Lily would have wanted Ethan to be happy again. "Thank you," Clara said quietly. "You honor her memory by loving him, by giving him a reason to live again." Dancing Bird touched Clara's cheek. "That is a gift." By September, the cabin was finished. It wasn't fancy, rough-hewn and sturdy, built to withstand mountain winters, but it was home. They moved in on a clear, cold morning. Ethan carried Clara over the threshold, and she laughed, actually laughed, at the absurdity and sweetness of it. That night, they lay in their new bed, listening to the boys' soft breathing from the loft. "We did it," Clara whispered. "We did. Now what?" Ethan pulled her close. "Now we live." And they did. But living, Clara was learning, was never simple. The railroad's appeal was still pending. Winter was coming. And somewhere out there, Vernon Garrett and Harrison Voss were planning their next move. For now, though, they had this: a cabin in the mountains, a family, and each other. It would have to be enough. The first snow came early that year, dusting the valley in white before October had even ended. Clara stood on the porch of the new cabin, watching the flakes drift down through the pines, and felt a strange mix of peace and dread. They'd built something here, something real. But she knew it wasn't over. Victory in court didn't mean the railroad had given up. It just meant they'd have to find another way. She was right. The letter arrived in mid-November, delivered by a rider who looked uncomfortable with his errand. Clara signed for it and opened it at the kitchen table while Ethan was out checking traps. It wasn't from the railroad's lawyers. It was from a land development company called Frontier Holdings, offering to purchase the mountain property for twice what the railroad had offered. The letter was polite professional, and utterly transparent in its intent. When Ethan came home that evening, stamping snow from his boots, Clara handed him the letter without a word. He read it, his jaw tightening with each line. Then he crumpled it and threw it into the fire. "They think we're stupid," he said. "They think we're desperate. Same thing in their eyes." Ethan sat down heavily. Frontier Holdings is probably owned by the railroad or funded by them. They figure if they can't take the land by force, they'll buy it through a shell company. What do we do? Ignore it. Clara shook her head. They won't stop. If this doesn't work, they'll try something else. They've got too much invested to walk away now. Ethan stared into the fire. Then we keep fighting. For how long? As long as it takes. But Clara could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The court battle had drained them, financially, emotionally. They'd won, but the cost had been steep. And now the thought of starting all over again felt like staring at a mountain they didn't have the strength to climb. Samuel came downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Clara said quickly. "Go back to bed." "I heard you talking about fighting." Ethan looked at the boy. "It's grown-up business, Sam. It's about the railroad, isn't it? About them trying to take our land?" Clara and Ethan exchanged a glance. Samuel was 10, but he wasn't a child anymore. The past year had aged him in ways that hurt to see. "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "It's about that." Samuel crossed his arms. "Then I want to help." "Sam, I'm not a baby. This is our home too, mine and Thomas's. We should get to fight for it." Ethan's expression softened. "You're already helping, just by being here, by being strong." "That's not enough." "It is," Clara said gently. "Sometimes just holding on is the bravest thing you can do." Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, voice small and worried. "Are we leaving again?" "No," Clara said firmly. "We're not leaving, not ever." Thomas came down and climbed into Clara's lap, even though he was getting too big for it. She held him anyway, and Samuel sat on the floor by Ethan's chair, and they stayed like that until the fire burned low. The next week brought more trouble, this time in a form Clara hadn't anticipated. She'd ridden down to Hollow Creek for supplies, leaving the boys with Ethan. The general store was busy, full of people stocking up before winter closed the passes. Clara was loading flour and salt into her saddlebags when she overheard two men talking near the counter. "Heard the territorial governor's getting involved," one said. "Railroad's been putting pressure on him, jobs, tax revenue, all that. What's he going to do? Word is he's considering an executive order, override the court decision, push the condemnation through anyway." Clara's blood ran cold. She turned and walked up to the men. "Excuse me, what did you just say about the governor?" The men looked at her, recognition flickering in their eyes. One of them, a rancher named Talbot, cleared his throat. "Just rumors, Mrs. Hale." "What kind of rumors?" "The railroad's been lobbying hard. They've got friends in high places. Some folks are saying Governor Hendricks might step in." "Can he do that? Overrule a court decision?" Talbot shrugged. "He's the governor. He can do a lot of things." Clara finished loading her supplies in silence, her mind racing. When she got back to the cabin, Ethan was splitting wood. She told him what she'd heard. "That's not legal," Ethan said, sinking the axe into a log. "A governor can't just override a judicial ruling. Legal and possible are two different things. If Hendricks wants to push this through, he'll find a way to justify it." Ethan pulled the axe free. "Then we go to Cheyenne, talk to him directly." "You think he'll listen?" "Probably not, but we have to try." They made the trip the following week, leaving the boys with Joseph and Dancing Bird. The ride to Cheyenne was long and cold, the roads already turning muddy with snowmelt and freeze cycles. Governor Marcus Hendricks had an office in the territorial capital, a grand building that made Clara feel small the moment she walked in. They waited for 2 hours on a hard bench before a clerk finally ushered them into the governor's chambers. Hendricks was a portly man in his 50s with mutton-chop whiskers and the kind of friendly smile politicians wore like armor. He shook Ethan's hand, nodded politely to Clara, and gestured for them to sit. "Mr. and Mrs. Hale, I've read about your case. Quite a battle you fought." We're here because we've heard rumors, Clara said, not bothering with pleasantries. That you're considering an executive order to override the court's decision. Hendrick's smile didn't waver. Rumors are a common affliction in politics, Mrs. Hale. That's not an answer. No, it's not. He leaned back in his chair. Let me be frank with you. The Continental Western Railroad represents the future of this territory. It brings commerce, connects communities, creates opportunity. Your case, while sympathetic, affects a very small number of people. So you're considering it, Ethan said. I'm considering what's best for the territory as a whole. And what about what's best for the people who actually live here, the ones who built their lives before the railroad showed up? Hendrick sighed. Mr. Hale, I understand your attachment to that land. Truly, I do. But progress requires sacrifice. Sometimes individual interests must yield to the greater good. Clara felt her anger rising. That's easy to say when it's not your family buried in the ground they want to tear through. I'm aware of the personal nature of this for you, but my responsibility is to the entire territory, not to one family's grief. Then let me ask you something, Governor. Clara leaned forward. How much did the railroad pay you? Hendrick's face darkened. That's an outrageous accusation. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've already made up your mind. You're just waiting for the right moment to sign whatever the railroad puts in front of you. Mrs. Hale, I suggest you watch your tone. Ethan put a hand on Clara's arm, but she shook him off. I'll watch my tone when you start acting like a public servant instead of a railroad employee. Hendrick stood. This meeting is over. We won our case, Clara said, not moving. In a court of law, with evidence and testimony and everything your precious system says matters. And you're going to throw it away because some railroad executives waved money in your face. Out. Now. Ethan pulled Clara to her feet. Come on. They left, but not before Clara turned at the door. You do this, Governor, and everyone will know. Every newspaper in the territory will hear about it. And when people ask why you betrayed your own constituents, you'd better have a good answer. Outside, Ethan didn't speak until they'd walked 2 blocks. That went well, he said dryly. I couldn't help it. The smug bastard. I know. But you might have just made things worse. Clara stopped walking. Worse than him signing an executive order? Ethan, he's already decided. We didn't change his mind because his mind was never open to begin with. So what do we do? Clara thought about it. We do what we do best. We make noise. They went straight to Margaret Howe's office. The reporter listened to their account of the meeting, scribbling notes furiously. He didn't explicitly confirm the executive order? She asked. Didn't deny it either, Claire said. And his whole tone suggested it's already in the works. Howe tapped her pencil against her notepad. This is explosive. If I print this, it's going to create a firestorm. Good, Clara said. Let it burn. The article ran the next day, front page again. The headline read, Governor Hendricks poised to override court, favor railroad over settlers. The reaction was immediate and fierce. Letters flooded the Capitol. Citizens organized protests. Even some of the railroad supporters started questioning whether this was the right move. But Hendricks didn't back down. 2 weeks later, he issued the executive order. The document was dense with legal language, but the core was simple. In the interest of territorial development and public welfare, the governor was authorizing the Continental Western Railroad to proceed with land acquisition through eminent domain, notwithstanding previous court rulings. Benjamin Cotter called it a travesty. This is an abuse of executive power. We'll challenge it immediately. How long will that take? Ethan asked. Months. Maybe longer. We don't have months. They'll start surveying the land as soon as the snow melts. Cotter spread his hands helplessly. Then I don't know what to tell you. Legally, we're in uncharted territory. The governor has broad powers, but this is unprecedented. Clara felt the ground shifting beneath her again. Every time they built something, someone tore it down. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed beside Ethan, listening to him breathe, and wondered how much more they could endure. They'd given everything to this fight. Money, time, peace of mind. And for what? To watch it all get stripped away by a politician's signature? She must have dozed off eventually because she woke to the sound of voices outside. Ethan was already up, pulling on his pants and reaching for his rifle. "Stay here," he whispered. Clara ignored him and followed. Outside, a group of riders sat on horses at the edge of the clearing. Dawn was just breaking, the sky pale and cold. Clara counted 6 men, all armed. Vernon Garrett sat at the front, looking tired and grim. "Mr. Hale?" he called. "We need to talk." Ethan raised the rifle. "You're on my property. Get off." "We have authorization from the governor's office. As of this morning, this land is under railroad claim." "Like hell it is." Garrett pulled out a folded document. "It's all legal. You can read it if you want, but the end result is the same. You have 72 hours to vacate. After that, we begin demolition and construction." Clara stepped forward. "You're not touching this cabin. Mrs. Hale, I don't want this to get ugly, but we have a job to do, and we will do it, with or without your cooperation." "Then you'll do it over our dead bodies." One of the other riders laughed. Garrett silenced him with a look. "Don't be dramatic," Garrett said. "This is business, just business." "It's our home," Clara said. "Our family, our life. That's not business." Garrett's expression softened slightly. "I know you fought hard. I know this matters to you, but you've lost. The governor's order is final. There's nothing left to fight." "There's always something left to fight," Ethan said quietly. Garrett sighed. 72 hours, Mr. Hale. Use them wisely." He turned his horse and rode off, the others following. Clara and Ethan stood in the clearing, watching them disappear into the trees. "What do we do?" Clara asked. "I don't know." For the first time since she'd known him, Ethan sounded defeated. But Clara wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She rode to the tribal camp that afternoon, leaving Ethan with the boys. Joseph and Dancing Bird listened to her account, their faces growing darker with each detail. "The governor has no right," Joseph said. "This land was never his to give. Legally, it was Ethan's, and now the territory's claiming eminent domain." Dancing Bird stood abruptly. "Then we make it impossible for them." "How?" "We occupy the land. All of us. They can't demolish a cabin with people living in it, not without risking a massacre. And even this governor won't go that far." Clara stared at her. "You'd do that? Put yourselves in danger for us?" "This is not just for you," Dancing Bird said. "This is for all of us. If they take this land, they will take more. They always do. We draw the line here." By the next morning, 20 people from the tribe had arrived at the cabin. They set up lodges around the property, built cook fires, and made it clear they weren't leaving. Garrett returned that afternoon with a larger group, 10 men this time, some of them armed. "What is this?" he demanded. "A peaceful occupation," Clara said. "We're not leaving, and neither are they. This is railroad property now. Then arrest us, drag us off, but you'll have to do it in front of witnesses, in front of reporters." She gestured to Margaret Howe, who'd arrived that morning with a photographer. "And the whole territory will see exactly what kind of people you are." Garrett's jaw worked. He looked at the lodges, the families, the children playing near the stream. He looked at the photographer setting up his camera. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "So are you," Clara replied. Garrett rode off again, but Clara knew this wasn't over. They'd bought time, maybe days, maybe only hours, but the railroad wouldn't back down. Not now. That night, the camp felt like a fortress. People shared food, told stories, sang songs. Samuel and Thomas played with the tribal children, their laughter ringing through the trees. For a moment, it almost felt like a celebration. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something terrible. She found Ethan sitting alone near the graves, his rifle across his lap. "You should get some sleep," she said. "Can't." Clara sat beside him. "What are you thinking?" "That I brought this on all of you. If I just sold the land back when they first asked, then we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have fought. We wouldn't have built any of this. We might have been safe." "Safe isn't the same as alive." Clara took his hand. "I'd rather fight and lose than never fight at all." Ethan looked at her, and something in his expression broke. "I love you, Clara. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too. They sat together in the darkness, holding hands, knowing that tomorrow might bring the end of everything they'd built. But for now, they had this. The confrontation came 2 days later. Garrett returned with a federal marshal and 30 armed men. The marshal was a hard-faced man named Cutler who'd clearly dealt with situations like this before. This is a lawful order, Cutler announced, his voice carrying across the clearing. You are trespassing on land claimed under eminent domain. You have 1 hour to disperse. Anyone remaining after that will be arrested. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. We're not trespassing. We're standing on land that was stolen through corruption and political manipulation. That's not for you to decide, ma'am. The governor's order is legal and binding. Legal doesn't make it right. Cutler's expression didn't change. 1 hour. The next 60 minutes were the longest of Clara's life. People debated whether to stay or go. Some wanted to hold their ground. Others, especially those with children, started packing. Dancing Bird refused to leave. I will not move. Joseph agreed. We stay. In the end, 12 people remained. Clara, Ethan, the boys, Dancing Bird, Joseph, 2 horses, and 6 others. When the hour was up, Cutler gave the order. The deputies moved in with rifles and shackles. They grabbed Joseph first, dragging him toward a wagon. He didn't resist, but he didn't make it easy either. Dancing Bird they had to carry. Clara watched it happen, her heart breaking, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. This was what standing your ground looked like. This was the cost. When they came for her, she looked at Samuel and Thomas. Remember this, she said. Remember that we fought. The boys were crying. Ethan tried to intervene, and a deputy hit him in the stomach with a rifle butt. He went down hard. Ethan! Clara screamed. They dragged her away before she could reach him. The last thing she saw before they threw her in the wagon was Margaret Howe's photographer capturing it all. The violence, the tears, the injustice. At least the world would see. They were taken to a holding facility in Cheyenne, a grim building with barred windows and the smell of unwashed bodies. Clara was separated from Ethan and the boys, thrown into a cell with Dancing Bird and 2 other women from the camp. How long will they keep us? One woman asked. As long as they want, Dancing Bird said bitterly. But they were wrong. The photographs hit the newspapers the next day. The images were damning. Armed men dragging away women and children, Ethan on his knees in the dirt, Clara's face twisted in anguish. The headline in the Tribune read, Federal force used to evict peaceful protesters. Is this progress? Public outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Letters poured into the governor's office, the marshal's office, the railroad's headquarters. Church groups organized vigils. Citizens demanded answers. Governor Hendricks, facing a political disaster, issued a statement calling for a review of the situation. Within 48 hours, they were released. Cutler himself came to unlock the cells, his face carefully neutral. You're free to go. Clara stood. What about the land? That's above my pay grade, ma'am. Outside, Ethan was waiting with the boys. They ran to Clara and she held them so tight she thought she might break. What happens now? Samuel asked. Clara didn't have an answer, but Margaret Howe did. She found them outside the holding facility, her notebook already out. The governor's calling for a territorial commission, she said, to investigate the railroad's claims, review the executive order, and determine if proper procedures were followed. It's not a victory, but it's a delay. How long? Ethan asked. Months, probably. Maybe longer. Clara closed her eyes. More waiting, more fighting, more uncertainty. But they were free, and the land was still theirs, at least for now. We'll take it, Clara said. They returned to the mountain cabin to find it still standing, untouched. The railroad, facing intense scrutiny, had backed off while the commission conducted its investigation. Winter set in hard after that, isolating them from the world. Snow piled 6 feet deep in places. They lived on stored food and whatever game Ethan could trap. The boys grew stronger, quieter, more self-sufficient, and Clara and Ethan grew closer. One night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Ethan spoke into the darkness. Do you regret it? Any of this? Clara thought about everything they'd been through, the fear, the loss, the constant fighting. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret a single moment. Even when we lose, we haven't lost yet." Ethan pulled her close. "I don't know what the commission will decide. Don't know if we'll still be here next year. But whatever happens, thank you for standing with me, for not giving up. Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, while outside the snow continued to fall and the world held its breath. Spring came late to the mountains that year, like the world itself was holding back, waiting to see how things would turn out. The snow melted slowly, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. Clara stood on the porch watching water drip from the eaves, listening to the creek swell with runoff, and thought about how many times she'd stood in this exact spot, wondering if they'd still be here tomorrow. The Territorial Commission had been deliberating for 4 months. 4 months of silence punctuated by occasional updates from Benjamin Cotter that amounted to nothing. The railroad was stalling. The governor was backtracking. The commissioners were split. Nobody wanted to make a decision that would anger half the territory. Meanwhile, Clara and Ethan lived in limbo. They planted a garden because you had to believe in summer even when winter might kill you. They repaired fences because work kept your hands busy and your mind from spiraling. They taught the boys to read and cipher because education mattered even when the future was uncertain. Samuel was nearly 11 now, tall and lean, with Ethan's quiet intensity. Thomas had just turned 8, still prone to nightmares but tougher than he looked. Both boys had stopped asking when the railroad would come back. They'd learned, as children do, to live with uncertainty as a permanent condition. One morning in early May, a rider came up the mountain trail. Clara saw him first, a dark shape against the green backdrop of new growth. Her heart jumped. Riders always brought news, and news was rarely good. But when the man got closer, she recognized him. Benjamin Cotter, looking exhausted and windburned, his suit rumpled from days of travel. Ethan came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Ben, what brings you up here?" Cotter dismounted, his legs stiff. The commission reached a decision. Clara felt the world tilt. And? They're split 3-2, which means no consensus. Ethan's shoulders sagged. So nothing changes. Not exactly. Cotter pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag. The majority opinion, the 3, ruled that Governor Hendricks overstepped his authority. They're recommending the executive order be rescinded and the original court decision upheld. Clara's breath caught. That's good, isn't it? It would be, except the minority filed a dissent arguing that territorial development supersedes individual property rights. And here's where it gets complicated. The commission's findings are advisory only. The final decision still rests with Hendricks. So we're right back where we started, Ethan said flatly. Worse, actually. Hendricks is facing re-election next year. If he reverses himself, he looks weak. If he doubles down, he looks like a tyrant. He's trapped between the railroad's money and public opinion. What's he going to do? Clara asked. Cotter hesitated. I don't know, but I heard something else. Vernon Garrett resigned from the railroad 2 weeks ago. Ethan frowned. Why? Rumor is he had a falling out with the board, some disagreement about strategy. His replacement is a man named Silas Drummond, younger, more aggressive, less interested in public relations. Clara felt a chill. What does that mean for us? It means the railroad's done playing nice. Drummond's already filed new condemnation papers, this time claiming mineral rights. If they can't get the land for the railway, they'll get it for copper mining. There's no copper up here, Ethan said. Doesn't matter. They just need a legal pretext. And mineral rights law is even murkier than eminent domain. Clara looked at Ethan, then back at Cotter. How do we fight this? Honestly, I don't know that we can. Mineral claims bypass a lot of the protections you had before. If Drummond can show even trace evidence of valuable ore, he can force a sale. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Then we make sure he doesn't find any evidence. Ethan, I'm serious. If he sends surveyors up here, we turn them away. If he sends miners, we do the same. They want this land, they'll have to take it by force. And this time, I won't go quietly. Cotter looked worried. That's a dangerous road. So is rolling over and dying. Clara touched Ethan's arm. Let's not make any decisions right now. Ben, stay the night. You look like you're about to fall over. They fed Cotter and gave him a place to sleep, but Clara couldn't rest. She lay awake beside Ethan, listening to him breathe, knowing he wasn't asleep either. "We can't keep living like this," she whispered, always waiting for the next attack, always fighting. "I know. So what do we do?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. "We go on the offensive." Clara rolled over to face him. "What do you mean?" "We've been reacting this whole time, defending. Maybe it's time we made them react to us." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'm tired of playing defense." The next morning, Cotter left early, promising to keep them informed. Clara watched him ride away, then turned to find Ethan already saddling horses. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To see Joseph. I have an idea, but I'll need his help." They rode to the tribal camp with the boys, arriving just before noon. Joseph was outside his lodge, working on a bow. He looked up when they approached, his expression wary. "You have news?" he asked. Ethan dismounted. "We need to talk, all of us." Joseph called a gathering. By late afternoon, 20 people sat in a circle, tribal elders, young men, Dancing Bird, 2 horses, and several others who'd stood with them before. Ethan stood in the center, and Clara could see him gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "The railroad's coming back. Different name, different strategy, but same goal. Take our land, tear it apart, and leave nothing behind. We can keep fighting them in courts and commissions, but that's a game they've rigged. We'll never win that way." An elder named Grey Wolf spoke up. "What are you proposing? Make the land worthless to them, or at least make it so expensive to develop that they give up and find somewhere else." "How?" Ethan looked at Joseph. "You told me once that your people use this valley for generations, that there are sacred sites, burial grounds, places of spiritual significance all through these mountains." Joseph nodded slowly. "Yes, but we have no legal claim. The government doesn't recognize our rights to land we don't occupy." "What if you did occupy it? What if we built something here, a permanent settlement, a community, that proved ongoing use and cultural significance?" Dancing Bird leaned forward. "You want us to move here? Live on this land?" "Not all of you, but enough to establish presence, enough to make any development legally complicated. If this becomes a living cultural site, the railroad can't just bulldoze through. They'd face federal scrutiny, tribal affairs bureaucrats, endless delays." Grey Wolf shook his head. "The government has broken every promise they ever made to us. Why would this be different? Because this time we have witnesses, reporters, public attention, and we're not asking for permission, we're just doing it." 2 horses grinned. "I like this plan." But others were skeptical. The discussion went on for hours, voices rising and falling, arguments circling back on themselves. Some saw Ethan's idea as a chance to reclaim what had been taken. Others saw it as inviting more conflict, more suffering. Finally, Dancing Bird stood. "My daughter is buried on that land. My granddaughter. That makes it sacred to me, regardless of what any paper says. If Ethan and Clara are willing to share it, to build something together, then I will be part of that." Joseph stood next. "I will also." One by one, others joined them. Not everyone. Some families chose to stay in the main camp. But enough. Enough to make a difference. Over the next month, they built. Not just shelters, but a real settlement. Lodges went up alongside cabins. Gardens were planted in communal plots. A shared cooking area took shape near the stream. Children played together while adults worked side by side, and slowly, tentatively, something new emerged. Not white, not tribal, but something in between. Something that belonged to all of them. Clara had never worked so hard in her life. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back ached. But every morning she woke to the sound of voices, laughter, life. And it felt like building something that mattered. Samuel and Thomas thrived in ways Clara hadn't expected. They learned to track game from 2 horses, to identify plants from Dancing Bird, to speak basic Shoshone from the other children. They weren't the same scared boys who'd arrived in Hollow Creek 2 years ago. They were stronger now. Braver. Margaret Howe visited in June, bringing a photographer. The resulting article painted a picture of cooperation and community, whites and natives working together, sharing land and resources, building a future that honored the past. The headline read, "In Wyoming Mountains, a new kind of settlement takes root." The article caught national attention. Papers in New York and San Francisco picked it up. Suddenly, what was happening on Ethan and Clara's land wasn't just a local dispute, it was a symbol. A test of whether different peoples could coexist, whether progress had to mean destruction, whether there was another way forward. The railroad hated it. Silas Drummond sent lawyers, then surveyors, then threats. But every time they tried to move forward, they ran into new obstacles. Federal officials showed up asking questions about tribal rights. Newspaper reporters wanted statements. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for the settlement. Governor Hendricks, sensing which way the wind was blowing, quietly rescinded his executive order in late July. He claimed it was always meant to be temporary, pending commission review. Nobody believed him, but it didn't matter. The order was gone. The railroad filed new claims under mining law, but those moved even slower than condemnation proceedings. And with each delay, the settlement grew stronger, more established, harder to displace. By August, Drummond was looking for a way out. He sent an emissary, not Garrett, but a younger man named Phillips, who had the decency to look uncomfortable with his assignment. Clara and Ethan met him in the clearing, with Joseph standing beside them. "Mr. Drummond has authorized me to make a final offer," Phillips said. "The railroad will abandon all claims to this land in exchange for an easement through the valley 6 miles north, the route Mr. Ross identified. We'll pay fair compensation to anyone displaced, and will fund construction of a school in Hollow Creek. It's a generous offer." Ethan crossed his arms. "What's the catch?" "No catch. We're cutting our losses. The alternative routes are expensive, but this fight is costing us more, in money and reputation. Mr. Drummond wants to move forward, and he's willing to compromise to do it." Clara looked at Joseph. "It's not just our decision." Joseph called another gathering. This time, the discussion was shorter. The railroad was offering to leave them alone, to build their route somewhere else, and to provide resources to the community. It wasn't everything. They'd still be tearing through land, still disrupting the mountains. But it wasn't their land, and the school would benefit everyone. Grey Wolf spoke for the elders. "We accept, but we want it in writing. A formal agreement, signed and witnessed." Phillips nodded. "Of course." The papers were drawn up by September. The Continental Western Railroad formally relinquished all claims to the Hale property and surrounding tribal territory. In exchange, they received easement rights through the Northern Pass and agreed to fund a school and provide employment opportunities to local residents. It wasn't perfect. The railroad would still scar the mountains, still bring change and noise and the complications that came with progress. But it wouldn't destroy the place where Lily and Anna rested, wouldn't tear through the settlement they'd built. And sometimes, Clara thought, compromise wasn't surrender. It was survival. The signing ceremony was held in Cheyenne in late September. Clara wore her best dress, the one she'd made herself from fabric she'd bought with egg money. Ethan wore a suit that didn't quite fit, borrowed from Benjamin Cotter. They stood with Joseph, Dancing Bird, and representatives from the tribe, facing Silas Drummond across a polished table. Drummond signed without comment, his face expressionless. Then he stood and offered his hand to Ethan. Ethan looked at it for a long moment before shaking. "No hard feelings, Drummond said. "Plenty of hard feelings, Ethan replied. "But we're done fighting." "Fair enough." They left the building and stood on the Capitol steps, blinking in the autumn sunlight. Margaret Howe was waiting with her camera. "How does it feel?" she asked. Clara thought about it. "Like we can finally breathe. What's next for you?" "We go home. We live." And that's exactly what they did. The years that followed weren't easy. Life in the mountains never was. But they were theirs. The settlement grew into a real community. More families joined, drawn by the promise of land and the chance to build something different. They established a trading post, a small church that Dancing Bird refused to attend but helped build anyway, and eventually, the school the railroad had funded. Samuel and Thomas grew into young men. Samuel inherited Ethan's quiet strength and Clara's stubborn determination. He became a skilled hunter and tracker, respected by both white settlers and tribal members. Thomas was gentler, more bookish, with a gift for languages and storytelling. He spent hours listening to the elders, recording their histories, making sure their voices weren't lost. Ethan changed too. The haunted look that had shadowed him for so long gradually faded. He still visited Lily and Anna's graves regularly, but not with grief anymore, with gratitude. He'd bring Clara with him sometimes, and they'd sit together in the place where his past and present intersected, and it didn't hurt the way it used to. "Do you think she'd approve?" he asked once. "Of us, of what we've built here." Clara took his hand. "I think she'd be glad you're happy, that you found a way forward. I couldn't have done it without you." "You would have eventually, but I'm glad I got to be part of it." Dancing Bird lived another 12 years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born and to watch the settlement become a bridge between worlds. On her deathbed, she called Clara to her side. "You are my daughter now," she said, her voice weak but clear. "Not because you replaced Lily, because you honored her, honored all of us." Clara wept. "I tried." "You did more than try. You succeeded." Dancing Bird smiled. "Take care of him. Take care of them all." "I will." Dancing Bird died that night, surrounded by family, and was buried near Lily and Anna. 3 generations of women who'd shaped Ethan's life, resting together in the mountains they'd all loved. Joseph lived into his 80s, becoming a respected elder and mediator between the settlement and the outside world. He taught Samuel and Thomas everything he knew about the land, about survival, about honor. When he finally passed, the whole community mourned. The railroad built its route through the northern pass, just as promised. It brought change. New people, new ideas, new challenges. But it also brought connection. The settlement was no longer isolated. Trade goods flowed in and out. Children could travel to larger towns for education. The world came to them, but on their terms. Clara watched it all happen with a mixture of pride and bittersweetness. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach in Hollow Creek. It was harder, stranger, more complicated. But it was real. It was hers. And she'd fought for every piece of it. She and Ethan grew old together in the cabin they'd built. Their hands became gnarled with arthritis, their hair turned white, their movements slower. But they were together. And that was enough. One evening in their 70th year, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Samuel and Thomas had families of their own now, children running through the settlement, laughter echoing off the trees. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked. It was a question he'd asked before, years ago, but the context was different now. Clara thought about the woman she'd been, desperate, grieving, clinging to survival by her fingernails. She thought about the battles they'd fought, the losses they'd endured, the victories they'd earned. "Not for a second," she said. "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts. They made us who we are." Ethan took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "I love you, Clara Hale. Have I told you that today?" "Only twice, but I never get tired of hearing it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Somewhere in the settlement, someone was playing a fiddle. Children's voices rose in song, mixing English and Shoshone in the way that had become normal here. "We built something good," Ethan said quietly. "We did. It'll outlast us." Clara smiled. "That's the point." And it did outlast them. Long after Ethan and Clara were gone, buried near Lily and Anna in the place they'd all fought to protect, the settlement remained. It grew and changed and adapted, but the core stayed the same. A place where different peoples had chosen to build together instead of tear each other apart, where loss had become a foundation rather than an ending, where stubbornness and love had proven stronger than money and power. The children who grew up there carried the story forward. They told their children, who told theirs, until the tale of the widow and the broken rancher who'd stood against a railroad became something like legend. But unlike most legends, this one was true in the ways that mattered. It was true that courage didn't mean fearlessness. It meant being afraid and fighting anyway. True that love wasn't a rescue. It was a choice you made every day. True that family wasn't just blood. It was the people who stood beside you when the world tried to break you down. And it was true that even in the harshest places, even against impossible odds, ordinary people could change the course of history simply by refusing to give up. Samuel Hale, at 73, sat in the cabin his parents had built and told his granddaughter about her great-grandmother Clara. "She was fierce," he said. "Fiercer than anyone I ever met. Your great-grandfather was strong, but she was the one who held us all together, the one who never stopped fighting." "What was she fighting for?" the girl asked. Samuel thought about it. She was fighting for the right to belong somewhere, to build a life on her own terms, to prove that survival wasn't enough. You had to live, really live. Did she win? Samuel looked around the cabin, at the settlement visible through the window, at the life his family had built here over 3 generations. "Yeah," he said, "she won. And in the mountains where Lily and Anna and Dancing Bird and Clara and Ethan all rested beneath the pines, where the wind still moved through the trees and the creek still ran cold and clear, their victory remained. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. Real in the way that mattered most, in the lives they'd touched, the community they'd built, and the stubborn, enduring truth that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Because in the end, that's what it all came down to. Not whether you won every battle, but whether you fought the ones that mattered. Not whether you had an easy life, but whether you built one worth living. Not whether you escaped pain, but whether you transformed it into something that could sustain you and everyone who came after." Clara Whitmore Hale had come to Wyoming desperate and alone, bound for a marriage that looked like a funeral. She'd fought railroads and governors and her own doubts. She'd lost sleep and money and peace of mind. She'd been arrested, threatened, burned out, and pushed to the edge more times than she could count. But she'd also found love, built a family, created a community, and proved that even the most broken among us can heal if we're willing to do the work, to open our hearts, to stand for something bigger than ourselves. That was the legacy she left behind, not in monuments or written histories, but in the way her descendants lived, with courage, with compassion, with the bone-deep certainty that they belonged to this place, and it belonged to them. And on quiet evenings when the wind moved just right through the valley, when the light hit the mountains in that particular way that made everything look golden and eternal, you could almost hear her voice, stubborn and certain, echoing across the years. "We built something here. We fought for it. We earned it. And it's ours. Forever."